influenced by that. And I just, they'll be interactive, and we will, you know, have some questions for you, and I hope that you'll feel free to respond and give me your thoughts and your answers and your feedback. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Is everyone seeing that?
Yep.
Great. All right, I'll start with the PowerPoint here. So what is Ebird? A very fundamental question, and many of you know the answer to this off the bat. Here's what Cornell will tell you about it: that it's a database of worldwide bird distribution, abundance, habitat use, and trends. Founded in 2002 as a collaboration between the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and the National Audubon Society, and it's facilitated by Cornell. It is a massive citizen science endeavor used by researchers. It is an example of crowdsourcing, which is a term that I'm sure you've heard. It is a tool that birders use to record their sightings, log their various life and year lists, and find more birds. And then in conjunction with Macaulay Library, it's a repository of bird photos, sound recordings, and videos. So this is a lot for one website to do. What do you get from Ebird? It's a free way to log your bird sightings, whether you're on intentional bird outing or not. Not only that, it's a good way to find more birds. You can search for bird hotspots, places to go birding. You can use species maps and eBird alerts to locate the birds that you really want to see. And it's a place to store and share your bird media, which is great. And you get feedback from Ebird reviewers. I wonder if you've ever had any. A lot of times when you're getting that feedback, almost always when you're getting emailed by an Ebird reviewer, it's because there may have been it's because we're seeking clarification on a record that you've submitted. So you may get a sense that we're sitting there being very skeptical of your records, thinking, no, that couldn't possibly be that. And that's a factor of, well, really Ebird is set up to contact you when we perceive that there might be a problem or a need for more information. But a lot of the time, I promise you, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, that person had a great outing. What a marvelous list, looks like fun. Photos are great. What a nice contribution to our bird data. I'm thinking those things all the time. So please know that it's not just problems that emerge when I'm looking at your Ebird reports, which I do often, but often quite the opposite. And I'm very privileged to be an Ebird reviewer for this region with so many dedicated and talented birders among you. The fundamental unit of Ebird is the checklist, which is a list of birds observed, meaning heard and or seen, along with supporting documentation as necessary, and that means written details and or media that you might include. Checklists begin with details about the effort that produced the checklist, meaning date, time, protocol. So you guys are, most of you are familiar with what protocol means. If it's a traveling protocol. If you cover distance, it's a stationary protocol. If you stayed put the whole time, there's also an incidental protocol if birding wasn't your main purpose. There are actually more protocols than you may be aware of, but those are the three main ones. The number of observers involved in the outing and any introductory comments you choose to make. People times often include the weather, which is helpful. So let's just take a look at ebird.org really quick, and we'll see some of the checklists that were recently submitted for the state. I'm not going to sort of pick out any of you, but let's look. And I was having trouble getting direct links to open from my presentation for some reason, so I have this already pulled up. So I'm sure you know that quickest way to do this is go to hit explore, and then in the region, you can just type Missouri. And do you guys look at Missouri checklists daily? I almost always do, because I want to see what people are seeing in the state. And so this is a process that I follow. So you can see here that here are the sightings that were most recently made here in the state. Top media, none of my photos are there. I've been taking really poor photos recently. But look at this nice photo of a buff-breasted sandpiper Chris Berger took the other day at this odd farm. Isn't that lovely? I went and chased those buffies, and they had flown a minute before I got there, Chris. So anyway, oh, I didn't mean to do that. So this is just something that I do almost every day. I take a look at what people are seeing in the state, and I just hit more recent visits right there. And you can see all the checklists that people made over the course of the day. And you can follow what folks are doing. When I first started Ebird, I didn't know any of these people. And it's been really neat. And I think you've had this experience too, probably, to get to know so many of the folks. Like, so many of these people that have submitted checklists I know personally now, and that wasn't something I could say 3 years ago. So in that way, Ebird has been functioning as a kind of social networking thing, which has been really valuable for me. I'll talk to you a little bit about the Ebird review process. So when you report a bird that's rare for the location and or the season, the date, I should say, or when you report an especially large number of an expected species, your record gets flagged. And flagging is done by means of what we call a filter. This is when this is what you see when you open an Ebird checklist. It's a list of expected species. If you enter a species that isn't on the filter, or a count that's higher than expected for a normal outing in the region, then your record will trip the filter. And I think most of you have had the experience of tripping the filter. I wonder if you feel a little bit of panic when that happens. I don't know, but you shouldn't. For any flagged record, you need to just enter supporting documentation before the system will log your checklist, so before it will actually be accepted into the system. A little bit more about this process. So flagged records are reviewed by regional reviewers who have significant experience birding the regions that they review. Reviewers have these options. They can accept a record into the public database if the documentation is sufficient, request more information before making a decision. So I think several of you have probably had emails from me requesting more information. And choose not to accept a record if the documentation is mistaken or insufficient. And when a record is accepted, it goes into the public database. It goes into public output. If it's not accepted, it doesn't go into public output, but it stays on your personal list. So you still can count it as a species for your life list, or a species for your year list or your state list or whatever. It just doesn't go into the public database. And reviewers are also responsible for informing observers if their records require documentation with the Missouri Bird Records Committee. So if the species that you've seen is so rare for the region or the date that it's been seen fewer than 15 times on that date or in that region, then it's likely that the Bird Records Committee needs to review it. So there are really two review processes that you're engaged in there. One is the Ebird review process, and the other is the review by the Missouri Bird Records Committee. And documenting with them is as simple as going to the Missouri Birding Society website. So the Missouri Ebird review team has changed a lot recently, in that it has had additions to it. So Josh Uffman continues to be the lead Missouri Ebird reviewer. Recently, he's taken on a lot of responsibility for setting the filters that we use in order to regulate checklists. And he's been doing a lot of work with that, and Josh is absolutely tireless. He works very hard on behalf of Missouri Ebird, and I appreciate so much what he does. So Ryan Douglas, formerly of Columbia, is the hotspot editor for Missouri Ebird, and he also reviews for the entire state. Now, when I say hotspot editor, if you suggest a new hotspot for the state of Missouri, and there's a specific process to do that, you can ask me questions about it if you'd like to know. Then Ryan actually reviews those requests for new hotspots and decides whether they fit the bill or not. So Mary Nemesek now reviews for the entire state. That's a change that was made this year. Previously, she was reviewing Western counties. Liza Berger reviews for the southern part of the state. We've recently added Marky Muchler to the list of Ebird reviewers, and most of the year she's down doing her, she's just finishing up her undergraduate work at Louisiana State University, but she's reviewing Clay and Holt counties, which is significant because that's where Smithville Lake and Les Bluffs are, two of our most significant birding sites for the state. And then there's me. I review for 4 mid-Missouri counties. So I thought you'd find this graphic helpful. I've got Cole, where I actually live, and I put a little monopoly house where my house is. It's sort of at the confluence of 3 counties. So if you look at Ebird regularly, you'll see that I bird in all 3 of these counties regularly. I bird in Boone, Callaway, and Cole, and that's because I really live right at the intersection of these 3 counties. But my house is actually in Cole, in Jefferson City. And then recently I've taken on Howard. Howard actually gets birded more than these other, and of all of them, Boone gets birded most, and second Cole, then Callaway, and then Howard gets birded more than all these other counties do, and it's because there are a number of really high quality conservation areas in Howard County along the river. What does an Ebird reviewer want to know if you submit a record that's been flagged? Ideally, you would be able to attach a diagnostic photo or audio recording. However, that's not always the case. So don't feel bad. Sometimes you can't get a photo. Sometimes you might not carry a camera, although we encourage you to. But even if you do, sometimes the bird won't cooperate. Sometimes you see it fleetingly, but you know exactly what you saw. Don't feel bad about that. What you do in that case is you type in a description of the bird, being sure to include diagnostic field marks that distinguish the bird from similar species. That is really what we want to see. Everything else is gravy. The fundamental of what we want to see is, what did you see that's diagnostic about species that can conclusively distinguish it from similar species? And later in this presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that with specific examples. When you're reporting a high count, what we really want to know is how the birds were counted in a way that prevents double counts and ensures a reasonable minimum. That's really what we want to know. Again, everything else you choose to include is gravy. I will hone in exactly on where you're saying how you counted. And if you don't describe how you count, you may get a follow-up from me asking, how did you count? One way is individually. Sometimes you write 1 by 1, and that's also known as count. So when you use the term count, the assumption is that you counted them individually. However, sometimes there's such a large number of birds that it's not reasonable to count them individually. And in that case, you can estimate in units, 5, 10s, hundreds. I tried to count in 10,000s once. I'm not sure how well it went, but I did my best. Edge was there, she knows. She saw me doing it. It was frustrating. But I did my best to count in units of 10,000. And how did I get there? Well, I started out by counting a region of 10 birds, then 20 birds, then I extrapolated up to 100 birds, and then what I'm doing is a kind of spatial mapping. So I'm looking at, well, how much space does 100 or 1,000 birds take up in the sky or in a field of view? And then I use that amount of space to map out the number of units that I think I can reasonably estimate in the field. So that's what we want to know if you submit a high count, how you counted and how you prevented double counting. So let's do a little bit of quick counting practice. The other day, was doing a little bit of yard work, and I heard what I was absolutely certain was a cedar waxwing. You know, it's this high C, 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 right? And I thought there's got to be cedar waxwings. Well, I look up in the sycamore next to our house, and this is what I saw. And I thought, I'll bet those are cedar waxwings. Not a great photo, by the way. But I was able to zoom in, and you can see that they are, in fact, cedar waxwings. There's one close up, and then here's another one. So, well, first, how many cedar waxwings do you think are in the photo? What are some ways that we can get to that number? Well, if you're lucky enough to be able to get a photo, and I ran into the house and got the camera, and I came back outside and they were still there. Later on, a young red-shouldered hawk joined them and chased about half of them away. But I was able to take this photo. And so one thing that I could do was, after I got the photo, I could go back through and I could count all of the birds. But I also did it in the field, and I counted all of them individually in the field. And I wonder if, looking at that photo, you can tell how many birds are in it. Anybody want to unmute and give an estimate?
200.
Who was that, Susan?
Yes, but I always underestimate, so it's probably low, but I'm saying 200 is a start.
I think you did pretty good, Susan. Anybody else want to try?
140.
Not bad.
230.
230 is good. Anybody else? Anybody think there's way more than 230?
350. I don't know if I'm on or not.
We're actually right in the middle. I counted these birds individually. In the photo, big photo on the left, if you can believe it, there are 285 distinct cedar waxwings. And, you know, this never fails to surprise me, how many birds are packed into spaces. I mean, when you just look at that there, it seems kind of sparse, right? But there's 285 birds in that photo. And there'd be a few ways to get there. By the way, none of the numbers that you gave me were way off in terms of what Ebird reviewers are looking for, right? All of those are actually pretty reasonable estimates. So one thing that you could do would be count the birds in this region right here. And if that's all you can do, then take that region and map it over each of these pieces of this tree, and then over that part, and over this part, and over that part, and that part. And then you can count by 20s or count by however you choose to count. And an eBird reviewer just really wants to know how you counted the birds. So this number trips the filter. What do you write? You've got a number of options based on how you counted. So what I ended up writing was counted individually in the bare branches of a sycamore tree. That's what I chose to write. And I included the photo, which is, you know, helpful to the eBird reviewer. But even if you didn't have one, because cedar waxwings are known to occur in large numbers like this, as you guys know, all you need to do is say how you counted them. And you might say counted in 20s, you know, counted by 10s, whatever will work. That's really what we want to know here. How about you practice writing details? So imagine that it's the middle of September and you see that. So that's not something that you're going to see in the middle of September for the most part, right? Because what are we looking at? I know, I mean, just unmute and tell me, what are we looking at?
Louisiana water thrush?
It's a Louisiana water thrush. And Louisiana water thrush is known to migrate early. As a matter of fact, all the way already in July, Missouri's Louisiana water thrushes are headed south. In August, they become increasingly rare. And then by September, there are very, very few, if any, Louisiana water thrush left in the state in the beginning of September. As a matter of fact, Louisiana water thrush records in September in Missouri are very scarce indeed. It would be actually a big deal in terms of Missouri avian history to have a mid-September Louisiana water thrush. That'd be a big deal. So say you saw this. What do you need to write? You saw it, you didn't get a photo, but what do you need to write? Anybody want to volunteer?
One thing that when I've had Louisiana water thrushes in my house, they tend to bob their tail up and down, and they're
Okay.
small, and they kind of hang out at the edge of the water, my little pond. So I think at the edge of the water, describing the bird, you know, small brown with striped breast, white above the eye, white eye line.
That's all. That's really good.
But I think the bobbing the tail is what I really notice the most. He's like goes up and down, up and down.
Yeah. So the behavioral detail is helpful. Some of you are already thinking, I'm sure, I need to make sure that I distinguish this bird, right? And what do I need? What would I need to distinguish it from?
From a northern water thrush.
You got to make sure that you're distinguishing it from a northern water thrush, which is known to pass through the state all the way through into October. So northern water thrush are coming through the state of Missouri right now. And so Louisiana and northern water thrush are a tricky species pair. So it would be extremely important then, absolutely essential, to make sure that you were conclusively distinguishing this bird from northern water thrush. So you have to report what you saw and explain why the bird you saw is not a northern water thrush. So what are some of the things that you could say to conclusively describe why this bird is not a northern water thrush? Now, bobbing of the tail would be helpful because Louisiana water thrush tend to do that. However, it's not diagnostic, as Edge is about to say. Go ahead.
She talked about the tail bobbing up and down, and that's not quite true. For a Louisiana water thrush, the tail motion is side to side and up and down, and it is slow, as in a Cajun waltz, Louisiana Cajun. For a northern water thrush, it's rapidly up and down, like a Yankee clipper, northern Yankee. So the movement of the tail is different.
So
you need to talk about that eye line. You need to talk about the color of the legs, and that yellow is not real helpful in our area.
Yes, it's not especially helpful. So Ed has made good points. So one of the things that you would focus in on is the fact that the eye line flares toward the back of the head, and in a northern water thrush, it's usually narrower, and it usually narrows toward the back of the head here. Right. You would probably also want to talk about the density of streaking underneath. Northern water thrush is more densely streaked underneath than Louisiana water thrush. Now, what's interesting is the two things that I've just told you, it is hard for those to be diagnostic in and of themselves. But when you start describing everything you saw together, then taken together, it starts to become diagnostic. I would say that of the field marks that I see on this bird, the one that would be most helpful to me would probably have to do with the throat.
Oh, yeah.
So do you see how, now both Louisiana water thrush and northern water thrush have marked malar stripes, right? But in between the malar stripes on a northern water thrush, sorry, didn't mean to do that. On a northern water thrush, you see marking here. Usually you see marking. And on this bird, which is a Louisiana clearly, you see a clean central throat. So that, in addition to the other field marks, would really point toward Louisiana water thrush. And it's these details that we're really looking for as Ebird reviewers. What are the conclusively diagnostic field marks that are distinguishing the bird you're describing from similar species? Okay, so I'm not sure how much time we need to spend on this since so many of you are avid Ebird users, but I'm very proud of myself for figuring out how to project my iPad on my screen. So I'm going to do it. So I've got the Ebird app loaded onto my iPad. And I have some silly texts from a friend that maybe hopefully you didn't just see. All right, so I'll open the Ebird app. And I think you'll probably increasingly find that it's updating every time you're opening it because they're always making changes to it. It can take a while. So say that I had a checklist today at 4:35 p.m. I can start the checklist. And I saw a hairy woodpecker. I saw a tufted titmouse, and notice that I'm using the this box to enter just enough. And I saw, let's see, I saw a white-breasted nut. So what you're seeing here, all of these list of species, and it goes on and on here, that's the filter. And I've just entered 3 expected species for this time of year and region, right? If I entered something that wasn't on the filter, I would have to, well, let's try. Common, right? So I've entered something that's not on the filter that hopefully will get in eruption this year, common red pole. And if I enter that, then I'll have to include comments. But I'll take the common red pole off. It's already telling me, it's prompting me to add comments. But I can take the common red pole off. One thing I can do is swipe left, and it will just clear that data. So let's say I had 2 tufted titmouse. By the way, notice what happens if I try to submit this checklist with 1 of each species. So I'll choose a location. You guys know, I think probably, that if it has this mark right here, which is like a little flame, then it's a hotspot. The first location is always going to be the coordinates for where you're standing at the time you're submitting it. And sometimes that's appropriate to use, and often it's not. West Main and Ridgeway, that's my personal location that I created for my house. This is another personal location, and these are always going to have blue markers. And then the hotspot's going to have an orange-brown marker with a flame inside of it. The nearest one to my house is Memorial Park. But I'm going to choose West Main and Ridgeway because that's where I was. That's my house. And then I was stationary. And I watched for 5 minutes. And then I'm going to indicate that, yes, this is a complete list of birds that I saw. So then I can submit it. Oh, I keep trying. Okay. Now I can go to, and you saw what I just clicked on here, this little item that says checklist, and I can see that I've just submitted it. Here it is up here. And say now that I want to add photos. So what I'll do is I'll click on this, and you can only add photos at this point through the website. You can't do it through the app. So I'll click on ebird.org right down here. And I actually got some okay photos of this hairy woodpecker, which I actually did see. So I'll go to Add Media, take me to this screen, hit Add Media, open up my photo library. There's a couple photos of this nice male hairy woodpecker. I selected those and now they're uploading. You can do this with sound recordings, of course, too. Then there's my checklist with the photos on it. I'm taking these through the window, the back window of my house, so they're not great, but there's the hairy. Nice, nice woodpecker, right? Look at that big bill on it. Nice tuft at the bottom of the bill, at the base of the bill here. Nice long black spur coming into the chest and breast area here. And then completely clean white on the outer tail feathers. There's no black here as the downy woodpecker would have. And then of course, you can also judge its proportion to the feeder that it's on. And everything points toward hairy woodpecker.
Pete, where did you go to add your photos? I missed what you clicked on to add something.
Sure. So that's actually going to change depending on what system you're working with. So because I have Mac and I'm working on an iPad, it'll take me to recent photos and it will take me right into my photo app. So now it's going to say, because I've already added photos, it's going to say manage media instead of add photos or add media. So I'll hit that. And then
Thank you.
you got it. That's what I do. And was that your question, Susan?
Yes,
Okay, okay, I answered it. Cool.
thank you.
You're welcome. So you can keep a checklist in writing or in your head. Some people think that they're good at that. While you're birding, increasingly people, for good reason, are using the Ebird app. I just showed you some basics of it. I didn't show you everything. It's good practice to start the app as soon as you begin birding, and that's going to help you track your distance and time accurately. So the Ebird app, in its most recent updates, will track your distance and will actually give you a nice map of where you've traveled. You have to remember, though, to turn it off. There's been lots of times where I've forgotten to turn it off, and my checklist has shown, I don't know, maybe I drove down to the boot heel or something. My checklist shows, that I've traveled 250 miles or something. So remember to turn it off at the end of your outing. And we already did that. And we did this. So you need to do it through the Ebird website. As I just showed you, you click on ebird.org at the bottom of your submitted checklist. All this can be done on your mobile device. Just recognize that when you're adding media, you're actually doing it through the Ebird website. And I showed you this. Now, what happens if I upload a photo of a bird species or a photo of a species, but I'm mistaken about what species it was? What happens if, for instance, I mistakenly put that under downy woodpecker? Anybody want to tell us what happens? Or?
As I found out, there's an easy way. You can go back to your checklist and they say change species. And then it will ask you, does that include all the media? So you can just go, and then you just type in which species you'd want. So if you did it incorrectly downy, then you just start putting hairy woodpecker, and then the thing would call it up, and then you just check that one, and then all your pictures and everything you put under Downey would get shifted over to Harry. So
Yeah.
I've had to do this a few times, as Pete can tell you, and I've had to kind of just go, it's really easy, just go into modify, edit species, and then just say change the species when you get to the incorrect one, and then they'll ask you if you want to move everything over, and just say yeah, just check yes or something, if I recall correctly.
That was very good. And I think that was Cheryl, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I think I can actually show this to you. If I can get out of the, there it is. So I'll go back to my checklist. And maybe it's not showing, but it will show it on the website. It would show it on the website. I just don't think this is expanded enough. But this is where you would see the change species option. You have to go to edit.
Go click the blue button.
Yeah. And see, I told you, you're going to show me something I don't know.
Pete, do the Ebird reviewers also review whether the photos and media are correct?
Yeah, so we do that. So sometimes I will find things that are incorrect myself, and I will contact the observer, and I can only do that in my region. So I couldn't contact someone in Henry County or something like that. But we also, we rely on Ebird users to do some of that reviewing too, because we can't look at all the media that's been put up. And so you can actually review a photo and submit if you think it's misidentified. I can, if we have some time at the end, I'll show you how to do that. I think many of you probably know how to do it. But if a photo gets put into what's called re-review in Boone County or Cole or Howard, Callaway, then it will show up in my list of things to do. And I can decide if the bird, in fact, was correctly identified, or if I agree with the reviewer, maybe an Ebird user, that the bird was misidentified, in which case I'll contact the observer and ask them to make the change. Did that answer your question, Betsy?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. So this is becoming an increasing problem with regard to locations, and it has to do with the way that the app is set up. It's really not your fault so much. I think that the app needs some addressing, but do you remember when I showed you the way that locations come up when you're choosing your location in the app? And the first thing that comes up is your exact location with coordinates. Just because it's the first thing that comes up doesn't mean that it's the best location for you to use. If you're within the boundary of a hotspot, you should use the hotspot. And don't use a personal location if you're in a hotspot. If an Ebird reviewer finds that you've done that, they'll email you and ask you to make a change. And the best way to do this is to merge your personal location with a hotspot. I don't have time to show you how to do that now, although I could do it at the end if people want to stick around, or maybe you know how to do it. The other thing is make sure you're using the correct hotspot. Now, I'm not going to, as the regional reviewer, I'm not going to invalidate your list if you've used a personal location instead of a hotspot. I will, however, contact you and ask you to change the hotspot. However, if you use an incorrect hotspot, and that is clear to me as the reviewer, then I will invalidate your list until you make the change to the correct hotspot. I'll give you an example. Over at Eagle Bluffs, there are some smaller hotspots. For example, the Missouri River access, which also says Eagle Bluffs, or Buck and Katy Pools, which also says Eagle Bluffs on it. And if it's clear to me, if you're reporting a lot of birds that are only in Eagle Bluffs proper, and you're not going to see at the Missouri River access, or you're not going to see them at Buck and Katy Pools, and you've got a 3 or 4 hour checklist, clearly you weren't at Buck and Katy Pools the whole time, right? So you used the mistaken location. And in that case, I'll invalidate your list until you make the change. And I'll let you know that I've done that. I'll just say, you know, I need to invalidate your list because the location isn't correct. when you make the change to the correct hotspot, your location will go back into the public database. And then I'm actually not going to do this right now because I'm running a little bit short on time, but I was going to show you the how to use some of the help pages, which are extremely valuable on Ebird. Actually, let's see. Yeah, we got just a little bit of time left, so not very much. I'll talk to you just a little bit about some species pairs, as I said I would earlier. In the fall, it's especially tricky to deal with dark ibis when they show up. So clearly, this is an adult whiteface ibis. Clearly, that's an adult glossy ibis. You can see the difference in the patterning on the face. Here you have white extending all the way behind the eye. And then here you have bluish facial margins that are ending at the eye. Here you have reddish facial skin, and here you have slate colored facial skin. So these are very clear as far as how you distinguish. But in the fall, almost entirely what we get coming through Missouri is that. And what the heck do you call that? Right? Now, an answer that I've commonly heard is, well, you call it a whiteface ibis because that's what's common. And you're almost right, because we get mostly whiteface ibis in the state. However, and it's not just, this is not just the case in Missouri, it is not possible with this juvenile, based on any of the research that's currently out there, to ID it to species. Young dark ibis all have slate-colored facial skin. They all have dark eyes. And they all have dark facial margins, sometimes showing a little bit of white. So what you call this bird is a glossy / white-faced ibis. And this is, I think, especially important in the fall because we don't have any idea how many glossy ibis might come through the state in the fall in Missouri. There may be quite a few, but how would we know if they all look like this? So this is one thing that I wanted to focus in on as far as difficult species pairs. And glossy and whiteface ibis top the list of difficult species pairs. I'll skip that part for now. What's this? Black-capped chickadee, right? We see messy bib, buffy reddish sides, white edgings on the feathers. This is very clear black-cap. Very clear Carolina. Neat bib. Very little to no coloration on the flank. Grayish edgings on feathers, etc. So this is a tough one. And in Missouri, we tend to make the call based on region, as opposed to ibis, which we're really not doing that based on location. But in Missouri, we tend to make the call based on the established regions of these two species. And in Boone County, you happen to be at a place where those two, just south of Boone County is the suture zone between these two species. When I see a chickadee at my feeders, I call it a Carolina / black-capped chickadee, even if it looks like this or like that. And the reason is these species freely hybridize at the suture zone, and you can have a chickadee that looks like a Carolina but has 80% black-cap DNA. And this is something that Mark Robbins reported on recently. Same thing with Carolina. You might say, well, then you need to hear it. And it's been increasingly shown that neither song nor call is especially reliable in identifying these two. I'll just do this real quick since it's really fun for you guys. I hope. What's that one? It's Trails flycatcher. It was split into 2 species. That's a willow, and this is an alder. How do I know that? Because that's what allaboutbirds.org told me. Otherwise, I don't know. This is not a species that can be distinguished by sight. You have to hear it. So, willow, the call is a whit, whit. And for alder, it's hit, hit, hit. You got to hear the call note is especially important. You can hear them sing too. You know, you can hear the boo, right? And you think, oh, you got a willow there. You probably do. But sometimes you don't hear it that well, right? Well, what's that? Eastern wood pewee, right? You've got to make sure you've distinguished it from a wood pewee. Make sure it's an impid. Make sure it has a faint eye or a weak eye ring. And then in season, make sure you distinguish it from that one. Yellow-bellied. Note the complete eye ring, distinct. And note complete and total absence of contrast between the color of the throat and the color of the breast. Especially important. Okay, in closing, just a few thank yous. This has been fun for me, and I appreciate everybody coming. Thanks to Jim and Nancy for helping me practice. To the Missouri eBird team, all my birding friends and mentors. And thank you to Mid-Missouri eBird users for your efforts in understanding. Questions? All right.
Pete, this is Susan, and
Hi,
I
Susan.
have a couple of checklists. I started in the eBird. The field trip got aborted, and I don't know how to delete the incomplete checklist.
Yeah, that's something that I can definitely show you how to do. And is this on the app?
This is on the app, and it was, of course, never submitted because it's incomplete.
So just take your finger and swipe left on the checklist. And I actually showed you how to do it earlier with the species, but you can do the same thing with the checklist.
Okay, I'll try that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions?
What happens if a hotspot develops near a place where you have a personal birding location and you don't want to lose that personal location? You know, you said you needed to merge it, but what if it was like your yard or something and you wanted to keep that separate?
I would say that you should, because your yard should not be part of a hotspot.
Okay.
If your yard is within a hotspot, that may be an issue that needs to be addressed by the hotspot editor. I would say, yeah, I don't think that personal yard should be within hotspots. I'm not sure that answered your question, but
Yeah.
okay. What other questions have you got for me? Or things that you want to talk about or let me know?
Pete, I have a question. It's Lottie.
Hi, Lottie.
Hey, so they changed it sometime, I don't know when, in the last couple months, but like, you know how we do yard totals? And I can find it on the webpage to go down and touch yard totals, but it just gives me the whole United States. And I used to, right there were filters, and I could say Missouri yards, and then I could say Boone County yards. I can't, can you not do that anymore, or am I just not seeing it?
Let me get back to you on it. You're not the only person that's been having this issue, and I haven't had a chance to look into it yet. So I'll be happy to look into that for you.
I wrote an article in the September chat on how to do yard lists and how to find your yard lists and take you through step-by-steps.
It was in the September chat?
Yep.
Okay, I'll double check it then. I'll look.
And if you have any other questions, you can contact me or Pete. But yeah, I gave step-by-step instructions on how to do a yard list in the chat, and there's other ways to do it than what I did.
Well, I can get it in there. I just can't find them to see other people's. Like, you know, I used to just kind of look, see in Columbia and Boone County.
there are two comments here. One from Cheryl. They changed the format today as to how results for different regions are shown. Preferred the old way as it was easier to find the information. So I didn't see that, but I know there was a big update made to Ebird yesterday, so I'll have to check that out. And then Jean is saying, thanks so much. For CAS planning, I'd love another session on using the report function. So Gina, are you asking about how to filter data for output?
You know, I struggle with it because I used to have software that let me pull up my personal list for Eagle Bluffs or my personal list for Kansas or, you know, something like that. And I really can't seem to do that. And so have those maps, those beautiful migration maps and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know how to use that function either.
Okay. So I think that the answer to that is there are probably some things I know and probably some things I don't know. So
Oh, you make me feel so much better, Pete.
okay, yeah, I think there's probably some things that I would know how to do and some things I don't know how to do. But if you got specific questions for me about that stuff, I can look into it and get back to you on it for sure.
Yep, Pete, so the new way, like on the iPhone, when they changed it now, so let's say I search Boone County for
Yeah.
mayor, the default takes you to individual species, like, you know, and then I couldn't figure out for a while, I finally did, like how to see recent sightings in our area. And what you have to now do, if you're on the iPhone, I don't know if this is true in like other media devices, but you have to then hit the checklist, okay? So like it's, whereas you used to just, you know, if you entered Boone County, it would immediately show you what the recent, you could say recent visits. You don't, that's not an option now, so you have to go to checklist, and then it'll show you the recent ones after you click on the checklist. So it's like, you have to, I mean, but it took me a while to like to figure out how, just where I could get that information. So it used to be much more user friendly. I think they just made this change. I've seen like maybe yesterday or today. But you may look at that because it's just been a new change that they just made to Ebird. I did have a question since maybe you know, I've been hearing talk about that they're going to allow videos at some point, and I think Ebird reviewers are allowed that option at this point,
Yes.
from what I understand.
Yeah.
I went to one in the Audubon, like the Lehigh, Pennsylvania last year, and they mentioned that they are beta testing that. Are they going to make that available to all Ebird users? Because there's sometimes where like the bird, like, you know, I think we were talking about the, you know, the Louisiana water thrush. It was so cool. I took a little video, but you can't like, it's hard. Like I think you can do a YouTube and then link it that way, but they're going to eventually support video on their site directly.
Yes, so that you're right that that's in beta, and the way that they're testing it is that Ebird reviewers right now are allowed to upload video. My understanding is that they're working out kinks with it, but that eventually Ebird users will be allowed to upload video, you know, within certain constraints, you know, duration and size of the file and that kind of thing.
To answer somebody's question, if you want to find an individual list, log into your account on Ebird and scroll down to where it says Explore My Sightings Lists and click on that. And then it'll give you a choice of world or any, and then you can type in any other location. You can type in a specific date. You can type in you know, like for June of 2020, if you want to see every bird you saw at Eagle Bluffs at June 2020, you can do that. If you want to see all the species you saw for all of 2019, you can do that, but that's done, as I said, from the, I can't remember what I just said, from the sightings listings on the app. But you have to kind of scroll down below everything, and it's there, and that'll let you do that. So.
So thanks for that. I'll check it out.
Okay. Are there any other
Anything
questions?
else?
Okay, thanks, Pete. Anybody?
Thank you. This was really fun, and it was really nice to see everybody in this format. And I hope to see many of you in person soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody have anything else they want to bring up for our meeting? Okay.
We've got a work session on Saturday. If anybody doesn't have anything to do Saturday morning, Wildhaven, we'd love to have you.
Kathleen and I give our regrets, but we're in Michigan. We can't quite get there.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording and end the meeting unless anybody